And we've got David Miller in Bristol. How you doing, David?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
And we've got Craig in Beirut. Craig Murray in Beirut. How you doing, Craig?
Oh, thank you, Gisborne. Good to be back.
And to top it all, the icing on the cake, Richard Medhurst. I'm not sure where you are, but it's great to have you. Where are you?
At an undisclosed location. No, I'm in Vienna.
In Vienna. Oh well, great. This is what it's all about. This is the best Zoom I can imagine. But the circumstances for it are not great at all because this morning I looked at this blog from Craig Murray. If we could start with this, Craig, I think it's really alarming, and it's not being presented to the anyone in this country by the mainstream media at all. This is what you've written. The end of pluralism in the Middle East. A truly seismic change in the Middle East appears to be happening very fast. At its heart is a devil's bargain. Turkey and the Gulf states accept the annihilation of the Palestinian nation and creation of a greater Israel in return for the annihilation of the Shia minorities of Syria and Lebanon, and the imposition of Salafism across the Eastern Arab world. This also spells the end for Lebanon and Syria's Christian communities as witness to the tearing down of all Christmas decorations, the smashing of all alcohol, and the forced imposition of the veil on women in Aleppo now. The speed of collapse of Syria has taken everybody by surprise. If the situation does not stabilize, Damascus could be besieged and ISIS back on the hills above the Bekaa Valley within a week, given the speed of their advance and the short distances involved. A renewed Israeli attack on southern Lebanon to coincide with a Salafist invasion of the Bekaa Valley would then seem inevitable, as the Israelis would obviously wish their border with their new Taliban-style Greater Syrian neighbor to be as far north as possible. It could be a race for Beirut unless the Americans have already organized who gets it. It's no coincidence that the attack on Syria started the day of the Lebanon-Israel ceasefire. The jihadist forces do not want to be seen to be fighting alongside Israel, even though they are fighting forces which have been relentlessly bombed by Israel, and in the case of Hezbollah, are exhausted from fighting Israel.
It's important to understand that what is happening now is entirely about breaking the lines of supply and communication between Iran through Syria and the resistance to Israel. That's what this is about. And that's why the Americans were, as I say, were yesterday attacking reinforcements coming to help the Syrian government. That's why the Israelis were bombing along the Lebanese-Syrian frontier yesterday as well, to prevent reinforcements from Hezbollah getting into Syria. This is a NATO-Israel-backed venture. It's entirely dependent on NATO and Israel support for armaments and for finance. And the jihadists are the tools of NATO and Israel in this, and NATO includes Turkey in this instance. In this instance, Turkey is a prominent and important NATO member in this scenario. So the two things are inextricably linked. And as I said in the blog, it's no coincidence that this new attack started on the day of the Israeli-Lebanese ceasefire. It's all one theatre. And this is basically an attempt to deal a major blow to the Palestinian resistance. And what we're seeing is because it has the support not only of NATO and Israel, it has the support of Saudi Arabia, it has the support of Qatar, it has the support of Turkey. Sadly, this does go to the sectarian divide in Islam, and there's no way of pretending that it doesn't go to the sectarian divide in Islam. Sadly, the Sunni powers are much more interested in eliminating the Shia Muslim presence in Syria and Lebanon than they are in saving the Palestinians. And they're quite happy to cooperate with the extermination of the Palestinians and the formation of a greater Israel. That enables them to support the ethnic cleansing of Shia and the extermination of Shia in Lebanon and Syria. And that's what I believe we are seeing.
I mean, that just seems to make much more sense when I think about how we talk about the neighbors of Palestine. The Muslim states around there are not supporting Palestine because you're in effect because they're Sunni. Is that kind of what you're saying too?
The great irony of this is, of course, that the Palestinians are also Sunni. The large majority of Palestinians being exterminated in Gaza are Sunni Muslims, but the Sunni regimes don't care. And often, we talk of the Arab street and how it's not reflected it doesn't. It's not reflected in its leadership, in the corrupt leadership of nearly all the Sunni Arab states. Doesn't do anything for the Palestinians, but the people have a automatic support for the Palestinians. That is true, except for the tremendous anti-Shia indoctrination and the, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that this sectarian hatred is extremely strong in the populations, and this use of sectarianism, which is deliberately inculcated, it's deliberately inculcated through all those Saudi-funded and Qatari-funded mosques across the Muslim world, including among Muslims in the United Kingdom. This inculcation of sectarian hatred is used by the West as a divide and conquer tactic. You're seeing the fruits of that now with the Americans and the British seeking to benefit from the Sunni Shia divide in order to press home these sectarian Salafist rebels to the benefit of Israel and to the benefit of colonialism in the Middle East. That's what is happening.
Right. That makes more sense to me. It's like these things keep revealing more about what's happening in the world. I mean, I'm learning a lot from what you've written there, Craig. Thanks so much for your blog there. Now, Richard, I noted on your Twitter account that there's one of the tweets you've put out. It's some video of someone from the so-called rebel group, and you've mentioned that they're multilingual. I'll just play the clip here.
Peki amacınız ne burada yani? Sizin amacınız ne? İsteğiniz ne?
Vallahi biz buraya geldik bu toprakları özgürleştirmeye. Burada bir zulüm vardı. Bacılarımıza tecavüz ediyorlardı, onları öldürüyorlardı. Müslümanlara zulüm yapıyorlardı. Biz buraya geldik Allah Azze ve Celle'nin dinini ikamet etmek için. Ve onun yolunda savaşıp ve burayı alıp fethedip burada bir İslam devleti kurmak istiyoruz. İslam emirliği istiyoruz.
So Richard, you're multilingual. Can you tell us what language that was and what this say about the rebel group?
Well, that wasn't Arabic. So I was poking fun at the fact that a lot of these fighters that they call Syrian rebels are in fact not Syrian. If I'm not mistaken, you're speaking Turkish. I can tell by the way it sounds. I'm pretty sure it's Turkish. It's not Arabic in any case. So, that's what's kind of amusing with a lot of these videos is that you can put on, a random video from these rebels, and you don't know what language you're going to hear. You might have Uyghurs speaking, Eastern Turkic, or Chechens. You might have Ukrainians. It's completely random. So I think a big problem with this whole, rebel movement is that a lot of them aren't even Syrians. So, you can't call it a grassroots, legitimate uprising, because they've brought in a bunch of foreign mercenaries. And even those that do speak Arabic, I mean, they're not necessarily Syrians either. You have a lot of fighters, perhaps not anymore today, but definitely during the war that came, for example, from Tunisia, from Libya, from Iraq, when it, Jolani himself, for example, who heads HTS himself, went from Syria to Iraq, and you had people going from Iraq to Syria. So the point is just that you have a lot of foreign fighters among these movements, and whatever Syrian opposition there was, because I don't think it's fair either to say that the entire opposition is are extremists and so on, but the ones that have power on the battlefield, the ones that are a force on in reality, they are the extremists. There is no military group that of moderate opposition, as they call them. They don't exist. They're extinct. If they did exist for a while, they're long gone. So those people that are in the middle, if you want to call it that, or between the status quo and these Salafi jihadists, they don't represent a large percentage or portion of Syrians, and they have no military clout or leverage in reality. So you have a choice between a bunch of foreign mercenaries backed by NATO, backed by Turkey, backed by Israel, who are basically Al-Qaeda. They've just changed their name. They've rebranded it to HTS, and the Syrian army. That's the choice. So I think it's really incredible that people can hear them speaking different languages on video and they still can't grasp that it's not grassroots.
Could you tell us about the Turkish connection here? Why is Turkey involved in this, and what are they looking to do? I mean, I don't really understand this bit.
Well, Turkey is a NATO member, one of the largest armies in NATO. So you have to look at them from the point of view that they, to a certain extent, represent U.S. interests. Not entirely, because they have their own goals as well, but they are a NATO member, and they have a border with Syria. A lot of these foreign fighters that we were just talking about, they were coming in through Turkey. Turkey opened the border to Syria and just turned a blind eye for many years, allowing these fighters to go in. And they've effectively annexed northern Syria, particularly Idlib. And if you go there, you'll find people are not even using Syrian currency anymore. They're using Turkish currency and Turkish lira, and Erdogan has made no secret. Matter of fact, he just gave a statement a few hours ago saying that he's behind all of this because he says he extended his hand to al-Assad, and al-Assad wasn't interested. I mean, it's kind of a childish way of looking at it, because he's basically saying, well, I wanted al-Assad to meet with me and he said no, so I sent a bunch of jihadists into Syria. I mean, okay, but the thing is, Syria was very clear that in order for the two presidents to meet, Turkey has to pull out of Syria because they're occupying a large chunk of it. It's not just the fighters that they're backing. You actually have Turkish troops inside of Syria from the Turkish army, in addition to these proxy groups. So a lot of them, all of the groups that were kicked out of Damascus, like Jaish al-Islam, and basically defeated throughout the war, they were put in green buses and sent up to Idlib, and that became their new base. So Turkey wasn't supporting all of them, but it was definitely supporting HTS, which is the largest one, which had administrative control over Idlib. In addition to that, you have to ask yourself, where was Turkey during the last 14 months when it comes to Palestine? Erdogan is always talking about supporting the Palestinians. He hasn't done anything. He's spent more energy on attacking Syria than he's done anything to combat Israel. As a matter of fact, he's the one that's shipping fuel to the Israelis from Azerbaijan. All of the fuel that goes into Israeli tanks, into Israeli jets, is facilitated through Turkish infrastructure. And Azerbaijan is basically one and the same with Turkey. They're like sister nations. So that's the other thing. He's serving Israeli interests by keeping that oil going to the Israeli war machine and now attacking Syria from the north. So that's going to relieve pressure on Israel and basically cripple the Palestinian resistance even more. And of course, Turkey is interested in combating the Kurdish presence in the northeast because it has a problem with the Kurds. It considers the Kurdish Workers' Party to be a terrorist group. It's basically persecuting Kurds. That's what it is. By calling them terrorists, it's persecuted them inside of Turkey, and it's trying to extend that persecution inside of Syria by attacking them in Hasakeh and Deir ez-Zor. But for the time being, they're protected by the US because the US is working with those Kurdish forces to take Syria's oil and wheat. So it's a very complex situation, but to cut it short, Turkey is expanding inside of Syria for its own interests, and it's helping Israel, and also it's going to persecute Kurds more later on.
And that it's so murky, everything. And these proxies and stuff, it's so complicated, but in a way not when you've just said it in a very simple way what's going on. But there is another issue that's been brought up by this, which is terrorism and what is a terrorist organization. And that HTS, I would give them proper terrorist status because they've got weapons and they're killing people. I mean, that's a pretty blatant terrorism kind of organization set up, but that's not what we're hearing from some of the media here. I mean, they're apparently they're diversity-friendly jihadists, which is an interesting way of painting them, and also. We've seen this is the Guardian, so we've had the Telegraph saying they're diversity friendly, and then the Guardian says we've seen this before. Residents of rebel-held Aleppo fear regime onslaught, so they're more worried about Assad than they are about the terrorists. Now you've pointed out that these are the HTS is a terrorist organization prescribed by the British state. Yet these two newspapers have been quite happy to kind of show some support for it. Surely they should be arrested or have all their phones and laptops seized like you had yours. What would you like to say about that?
Well, I don't think I would advocate for them to go and start arresting journalists and treating them like I was treated. But I would like to point out the hypocrisy that apparently it's okay to whitewash Al-Qaeda in Syria as long as you're serving MI6 interests and Israel's interests, because once again people need to understand that these so-called rebels, they're Al-Qaeda. They are Al-Qaeda. Al-Jolani, the leader, was a member of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He was in ISIS, and now he heads HTS, which is just a rebrand of Al-Nusra Front, which is a rebrand of Al-Qaeda. They can change their names as many times as they like. They've got the same policies. They've got the same behavior. They have the same head chopping, extremism, and they're not going to change their spots. So I just find it interesting that you can go and work at a national newspaper and publish stories that make literally Al-Qaeda look good, and the police are not going to bother you. But if you do anything else, they'll arrest you and seize your devices. Funny.
David, I having heard what Craig said and Richard said, it's really dismaying to read some of the opinions of some of the people you call on the left on this issue about Syria. I'll just show, this is Owen Jones. If your politics is based on consistently opposing murderous opposition, then you regard Assad as a tyrant. If you have any sympathies with Assad, then your politics isn't driven by opposing injustice at all. Owen Jones has been kind of saying it's not such a bad thing, these rebels. That's just one person who's done this. Then we've got other people on the media we would have thought would be on the side of Palestine effectively on this. This is Dili Hussein. Anti-imperialists are okay with Islamists when it comes to their pro-Palestine grifting and gatekeeping. When Islamists resist Russia, China, or secular Arab dictators, they revert back to the Zionist neocon playbook of labeling them terrorists, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. And then this is someone, Mohammed Jalal. There's a lot of misinformation about Syria and the rebellion, most of it coming from pro-Iranian and pro-Russian accounts who have masqueraded themselves as allies over Gaza. Washed out anti-imperialists who love tin pot dictators and sectarian partisans. Those three are different examples, but are they? Can I just? Are they useful idiots? What's going on here?
Well, there's a lot of different things going on here. I mean, these are all different people. I mean, for example, Dili Hussein is a much more thoughtful investigator of such matters in general than is someone like Mohammed Jalal, who is much more obviously sectarian. So when he talks about partisan sectarians, it's the same as the Zionists, isn't it? It's a confession. And someone like Owen Jones, well, Jones, of course, has gone through this process during the genocide of becoming very pro-Palestinian, as many people have noted. But at the same time, of course, he hasn't apologised for his role in undermining Corbyn. I saw a great tweet from Mike Kennard on this the other day, reviewing Owen Jones's role in undermining Corbyn and cozying up to the Zionists, going to the JLM's event. Oh, it was only to do with someone who was a friend of a father, etc. So Owen Jones, of course, is reverting to type on this question, just like some of the commentators from the Muslim community are doing, and reverting to type, which is to go back, right straight back within a week. We've had over a year of genocide, and within a week of this starting, they're right back to their position in 2011, 12, 13, and 14 on Syria. Now, what they saw in Syria, this is how Owen Jones sees it, is that there was an uprising in Syria, which was just part of the Arab Spring, and it was ruthlessly put down by the Assad regime. They call it a regime, and after that, a civil war and a revolution, etc. Right now, in my view, there was no revolution. There was no meaningful uprising. In fact, when they tried to start an uprising in early 2011, in February and March, nobody turned up. And what happened very soon thereafter was a large number of killings of security personnel, that is state personnel, by who? Obviously by people who had brought weapons into the country in order to start an armed rebellion. And that's what this was. It was an armed rebellion for the purpose of regime change. Part of the process of regime change, rolled out after 9/11 with those famous memos saying that they would do 5 countries in 7 years or 7 countries in 5 years, I forget which, of which Syria and Iran were, of course, the last ones. This was the attempt to remove the Assad government, and they did a massive covert operation to do it. Now, people talk about this and they say, oh, well, you're just, one of the tweets there said, oh, you're complaining about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and it's just Islamophobia. And I would say 2 things to that. First of all, ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Nusra Front and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, are actual organizations which we can actually analyze, and they are actually also supported by different interests. In the case of Syria back in 2011, 12, and 13, this was a massive covert operation run initially through MI6, because the CIA couldn't be seen to be doing it. So the CIA ran it through MI6. And in fact, all the way through this period, MI6 was in charge of the propaganda strategy on the Syrian dirty war. So they had hundreds of organizations, independent journalists, citizen journalists, human rights organizations to set up to collect evidence of chemical attacks, to bring to book the terrible tortures of the Assad regime. All of these people were working directly for MI6. And we know this now because many of the papers and documents on this have been leaked online. Many of the contracts for the PR firms in Turkey and all around Syria have been leaked. We know that that's what was happening. We know that that's what, and one of the key organizations at the time was an organization called ARC, from which a guy called James LeMessurier worked, and then he spun off from that organization ARC an organization called Mayday Rescue, better known as the White Helmets, in action as we speak in Syria now. And the White Helmets were a propaganda front by MI6, and of course they were involved, as were a number of other MI6 front groups, in pretending that there had been chemical attacks by the Assad government in Syria, in Khan Shaykhun, in Ghouta, and in Douma. Many others they alleged as well, all of which were fabrications, and some of which included significant war crimes, the killing of civilians in order that their bodies could be placed artfully for the cameras, in order to show that the Assad government had killed its own people. Now, this was a massive propaganda campaign. The people in charge of this campaign, for example, the guy who started this campaign in the UK, a guy called Kevin Stratford Hughes, in the Ministry of Defence, he has it on his LinkedIn page to this day that he started one of the biggest information operations in post-war period. And that's what Syria was. He doesn't mention it was Syria, but it was Syria. We know that from other sources. So look, there was a regime change operation. But all the people who we've just been talking about, they don't see it as a regime change operation. They see it as the plucky Syrian people rising up against a dictatorial government, right? But as Craig's been saying, look, what was going on there, the reason why they wanted to get rid of Assad was because he was part of the axis of resistance. And the weapons which went to Hezbollah and indeed to all of the factions in Gaza came through Syria. And I put out a long tweet of 11 different quotations, one from Sayed Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, but the rest all from Palestinian factions, talking about the way in which Iran and Syria were the bulwark which allowed them to increase their weaponry. So there's a particular quote from Nasrallah where he says that he talked to Soleimani, the IRGC general, who was of course assassinated by Donald Trump, and he said and Soleimani said to him, "You have these Kornet missiles from Russia, which you got from President Assad. I think that the brothers in Gaza should have these weapons." And Nasrallah said, "Well, I said to him, well, they came from President Assad, so we must ask him before we pass them on to the Palestinians." And so, as it turned out, Nasrallah then spoke with Assad. Assad said, of course, they should go straight to the Palestinian resistance. The reason that the Palestinians were able to target Tel Aviv and to have the barrage of rockets that they did have was because of Syria and because of Iran. And anyone who pretends that somehow there's a distinction that Iran and Syria have negative roles in the region and they're dictators and we need to support the Palestinians is a joker, is living in a fantasy land and does not support the Palestinians. They are actually helping to undermine support for the Palestinians, and that's very, very clear. But they won't say that, and they won't actually answer that point. Instead, what they say is, "Oh, David, you're funded by the Russians or by the Iranians or all this stuff," and that's what they come out with. But look, it's perfectly clear that if you want to support the Palestinians and you want the genocide to stop, then you must oppose the rebels in Syria.
Right. Yeah. And it seems ridiculous that they'd swallow what they're given by the West media and the Western governments about what they're supposed to think.
I think, I mean, to me, some of these people. I mean, look, I don't have any time for Owen Jones, or indeed for Mohammed Jalal, to be fair. But for someone like Dilly, who I have differences with, and I went on his podcast and I said some stuff which people didn't like about Syria, but he's a thoughtful guy, right? And he doesn't question some of this stuff. But I think in the end, what's happened is that people who buy into this, Muslims, Sunni Muslims especially, who buy into this, have been played. They've been played, and they've been played by the Zionists. Now, of course, Mohammed Jalal will say, "Oh, that I'm using the Zionist neocon playbook." I mean, honestly, give us a break. Who is it even which Sunni Muslim in the country really believes that I'm a Zionist? I mean, no, this practically the Zionists are supporting this. And we can see that if you look, if one reads the Jewish Chronicle, which I do for my sins most weeks, you see that there are Israeli intelligence officers saying, yes, well, of course we support this and it's great. And we did all these bombings. And look, the bombings that they are doing on Damascus, which people forget about and have been doing for the last year, these are bombings which are deliberately designed to help the rebels. They're not bombing ISIS. They're bombing the Assad government. And they'll also, of course, the Americans are doing the same thing. The Americans in northeast Syria and indeed in Iraq have been bombing some of the Assad government's supplies inside Syria, and also I think it was Craig said have attacked some of the Hashd al-Shabi, the Popular Mobilization Forces, which have been coming to the border to think about entering Syria on the side of the government. So it's perfectly plain that the Western governments and Israel are lined up right behind the so-called rebels here.
Richard, as someone who's born in Syria, what do you think about the country, the way it is at the moment, and how it could become? I mean, Iraq's is a terrible situation in Iraq at the moment. What do you think will happen to Syria?
Well, I mean, they've destroyed the social fabric with this this phony revolution. I mean, look, the last time I was there was 2011, and every year the country was getting better and better. And when I say better, I mean like tangible infrastructure. You know, no more electricity cuts, the pavement, roads being renovated, tunnels, you know, new infrastructure being dug every single year, the whole time it was being improved. And infrastructure is number one. You know, you can't run a country without good infrastructure. And Syria's always been under sanctions and had trouble. So you know, it's all the more harder. And you compare that to how it is now. They ruined the country. They destroyed it. They destroyed the infrastructure that I was talking about. Now you're lucky to get a few hours of electricity a day. It's even worse than it was when there were electricity cuts, you know, back in the day. And on top of that, they've destroyed the social fabric. And you know, this sectarianism is very, very nasty stuff. I mean, I'm not used to that kind of thinking, and I think it's disgusting and abhorrent. You know, it's like you know, asking, you know, if someone's Shia or Sunni. I mean, my mother's side of the family are Syrian Christians, so I find that even funnier when I get accused of being Shia. It just goes to show you how brainwashed they are. They're just looking for people to pick on, you know. And it goes back to what Craig and David were talking about. So what I'm trying to say is that how things were before, you don't ask, you know, what someone's religion is or what sect they are, because the whole country has got so many, you can't even count them. We've got Armenians, Palestinians, Druze, Bedouins, Kurds, Orthodox Christians, Syriac Christians, Catholics, you name it, right? You name it. Sunni, Shia, Alawite, dozens, right? So it has to be secular, and it has to be cohesive, and they've gone and just ripped that all up. And this is what divide and conquer is all about. If you look at the map of the Middle East in the first place, I mean, they carved Syria into little pieces. They wanted to put all the Christians in Lebanon, you know, put Jews in Israel, and they actually wanted to make Syria even tinier than it is after Sykes-Picot, and have, you know, little sub-states, so one just for Alawites, and it's madness. You know, it's just imperialist divide and conquer strategy, and now they've effectively succeeded in carving the country up into 4 pieces, and you know, they keep going with the sectarianism, and it's very disappointing to see so many people brainwashed. They're anti-Zionist when it comes to Palestine, and then when it comes to Syria, everything goes out the window, and all they can see is sectarianism. I mean, it's a shame. It's a shame, because that's going to take a long time for the country to you know, reel from.